In the quiet town of Brumley, Missouri, stands the Haunted Castle House, a place with over a century of untold stories. From Civil War camps to pioneer graveyards and doctors' offices to a bustling bed and breakfast, this house has witnessed it all. With so many lives passing through, the past feels like it never really left. Let's take a look at the history behind the hauntings.
I know that the paranormal is real.
In the heart of Missouri, nestled within the small, quiet town of Brumley, lies a house that has witnessed more than a century of history. Today, people call it the Haunted Castle House, but long before it earned its ghostly reputation, it was a place that held the memories of pioneers, soldiers, and families who carved out a life on this very land. Brumley itself is a modest settlement, small and unassuming, but rich in the kind of stories that few towns its size can claim. In the early 1800s, settlers arrived here with hopes for new beginnings, a chance to farm and establish roots in the rugged terrain of Miller County. Yet, as with many places during those times, Brumley was not untouched by the turmoil of the Civil War. In 1863, during the height of the war, Brumley became host to Union soldiers stationed at Camp Union, a small encampment just a mile east of town. For a brief time, this quiet area found itself entangled in the vast and violent struggle that shaped the nation. Soldiers gathered at Camp Union and the land surrounding Brumley bore witness to the unspoken weight of the conflict, leaving behind traces of wartime energy that some say still linger to this day. Though the exact origin of the Haunted Castle House is shrouded in mystery, the land it stands on has been a silent observer of history's many transformations. With the war behind them, Brumley's settlers returned to farming, and a gradual shift from pioneer life to small-town establishment began. Just steps from the house lie two graveyards, resting places that speak to the area's past. A pioneer cemetery marking those early settlers, and intriguingly, a mass grave. These graveyards bear witness to the lives and sometimes the tragedies of those who called this land home long before the structure of the castle house took shape. And as we move forward, we'll see how this history laid the foundation for the house's reputation, a legacy that is as much about the people who lived here as the spirits some say they left behind. To understand the Haunted Castle House, we first need to go back to its earliest days, a time when the land itself was just beginning to see the lives of settlers etched into its soil. In 1836, one of Brumley's early settlers, Reverend Jacob Shaw McComb Sr., claimed this land as his own. A man of many roles, farmer, teacher, and minister, Reverend McComb embodied the spirit of Brumley's first wave of pioneers. Reverend McComb didn't only preach to his small congregation, he also farmed this land alongside his family, building a life in the heart of Missouri's rugged landscape. Yet even the promise of a new beginning couldn't shield him and his family from hardship. His wife, Emily, tragically passed away on the property at the age of 40, and one of their children, little John, lived only 5 weeks before finding rest here as well. These early losses marked the land, a reminder of the toll that frontier life could take, even on the devout. Not long after Reverend McComb's time in the land, the property took on a new role. In 1875, it became home to Dr. John L. Connor, a man whose presence would further intertwine the land with themes of both life and death. Dr. Connor, a doctor and coroner, ran an office and apothecary here, treating patients and perhaps tending to those who didn't survive the many illnesses that swept through rural Missouri in those days. Although the castle house itself hadn't yet been built, Dr. Connor's use of the land established it as a place for healing and, at times, a final resting place. He is believed to have prepared bodies on this very ground, making this property a site of solemn rituals long before rumors of hauntings began. In the years that followed, the pioneer graveyard next to the property grew, a quiet witness to the lives that touched this land. Each headstone tells its own story of struggle, resilience, and ultimately, rest, a theme that seems to echo through the castle house's very walls. With Reverend McComb's pioneering faith and Dr. Connor's medical care, the early roots of the Castle House were shaped by the lives and losses of those who called this land home. And as Brumley slowly transitioned from frontier outpost to settled community, the property would soon find itself at the center of its own unfolding tale. By the late 19th century, Brumley was evolving from a rough pioneer settlement into a small, tight-knit community. It was during this period that the property saw the formation of what would later become the Haunted Castle House. While the exact origin of the building remains a mystery, historians believe the house was likely constructed sometime between 1885 and 1916. Several prominent figures during this time made their mark on the property, each shaping its future in their own way. Of those figures, one of the earliest possible builders was John C. Martin, a man who first settled here in 1885. Known as a merchant, farmer, and innkeeper, Martin's presence brought a new sense of livelihood to the property. Along with his wife, he raised a large family, though their story was not without heartache. Two of their children, heartbreakingly stillborn, were named Love and Dove. They were laid to rest nearby, within 1,000 feet of the home, a quiet reminder of the land's personal connection to its residents' lives and losses. The Martins' time on the property was marked by growth and sorrow. Their story persevered in the resting places they left behind. Following John C. Martin, the house saw new hands, each of whom contributed a new chapter to the property's legacy. In 1893, the property passed to Clifford J. Thompson, Brumley's postmaster at the time. His tenure on the land brought the house closer to the social heart of the town, as his role connected him to nearly everyone in the community. Not long after, his brother James Thompson took residence here and managed the property with a similar civic-minded spirit, running a store with his partner Dr. S.P. Hickman, who was another key figure in Brumley. While the Thompsons may not have left a permanent structural mark on the property, their presence wove the house into the social fabric of Brumley. Through daily interactions, news, and goods passing through the Thompsons' hands, the property grew as a place known by nearly everyone in town. In 1907, the property was acquired by Joseph McWilliams, a man whose ambitions were as forward-thinking as the technology he brought to Brumley. McWilliams was a miller by trade, and his grain mill evolved over time, eventually being converted into one of the area's first power mills, known as the owner of Brumley's very first automobile and electric company. McWilliams represented progress and a modern touch that the town hadn't yet seen. For nearly a decade, McWilliams lived on the property, pushing Brumley toward the future while keeping ties to its past. His ownership left a lasting impact on the town's development, and in his own way, he shaped the legacy of the Castle House as a place of modernity against the backdrop of Missouri's quiet rural life. By 1916, as McWilliams moved on, the Castle House had already seen its share of life and transformation. From John C. Martin's quiet family life to Joseph McWilliams' progressive energy, the property had become more than just a house. It was a reflection of Brumley itself, a place shaped by resilience, community, and the relentless passage of time. But even as the town moved forward, the house was already steeped in the stories and losses of those who came before, a foundation that would lay the groundwork for its eventual haunted reputation. In the early 20th century, the Castle House began to serve the community in an entirely new way. As the Brumley area continued to grow, the property became not just a home, but a place of healing. For nearly 2 decades, it would be known as a medical hub, where lives were saved, illnesses treated, and at times, lives quietly ended. In 1928, Dr. Walton Duncan Dixon, a Canadian-born physician, took ownership of the Castle House. Dr. Dixon brought his practice here, treating the illnesses that rural communities so often struggle with. In a time before modern medicine reached rural Missouri, his role was indispensable. Dr. Dixon's practice saw patients suffering from influenza, scarlet fever, and other ailments that could quickly turn fatal without proper treatment. The demands of this work likely took their toll, both physically and emotionally. Tragically, in 1930, Dr. Dixon himself would suffer a fatal heart attack within the very walls of the Castle House, leaving behind a grieving family and a legacy of service that the community would not soon forget. With Dr. Dixon's sudden passing, his son James Dixon took over the property. However, James struggled with demons of his own. Known for his issues with alcohol and a volatile temper, James brought a new, darker chapter to the Castle House's history. Locals recall a harrowing incident where he arrived at the Brumley post office intoxicated and armed, intending to confront a man he believed responsible for his job loss. In a tense standoff, James was disarmed by none other than Dr. Myron Jones, a physician who would soon become the next owner of the Castle House. Jones took the gun from James and returned it to his wife Chloe, who later sold it back to its original owner, attempting to put an end to the chaos. However, the shadow of James Dixon's struggles remained a quiet part of the house's history. Dr. Myron Jones purchased the Castle House in 1935, bringing a renewed focus on healing. Known for his resilience and dedication, Dr. Jones treated patients with influenza, scarlet fever, polio, and even ursyphilis, a painful skin infection. At a time when such diseases claimed countless lives, he worked tirelessly to save those who came to his door, risking his own health in the process. During his time on the property, Dr. Jones took extraordinary measures to meet his patients' needs, even going so far as to install a massive 9,000-gallon cistern under the house, ensuring a reliable water source. Yet despite his best efforts, the house bore witness to many who did not survive. Their passing added another layer to the property's quiet sorrow, one that perhaps became woven into the very walls. Dr. Jones's tenure marked the end of the Castle House as a place of medical refuge, but it left behind a profound imprint. For nearly 20 years, doctors and their patients shared their stories, their lives, and in some cases, their last breaths within its rooms. Each life that passed through left a trace, and the echoes of their suffering and care remain in the memories of Brumley's residents, and perhaps even within the house itself. As the decades wore on, the Castle House began to step away from its role as a medical haven. The property was no longer the bustling clinic it once had been, but rather it became a quiet, more ordinary home, inhabited by a series of new owners who brought with them a different, if quieter, chapter in its history. Yet despite the new domestic turn, the shadow of tragedy still lingered on the property. In 1956, William Sullivan, otherwise known as Bert, a local barber, purchased the Castle House and transformed it into a place of commerce once again, operating his barber shop out of its walls. His steady hand and easygoing manner turned the home into a modest social hub for Brumley's residents, a gathering spot where neighbors exchanged stories, laughter, and perhaps an occasional bit of local gossip. Yet, even as Sullivan filled the house with laughter and conversation, the house's history would claim yet another chapter of loss. Sullivan passed away in 1963 after complications with arthritis, and his passing added another layer to the history of personal tragedy within these walls. Sullivan's wife, Norma Connor Sullivan, continued living in the house for another 2 decades. Known for her work as a seamstress and for her hat shop, Norma brought her own quiet sense of resilience to the property. But with time, her health began to fail, and dementia clouded her later years, leaving her increasingly isolated. She too passed within the Castle House in 1984, marking the end of the Sullivan era. With the Sullivans' passing, the Castle House became a private home once again, and through the 1980s, it saw a series of new residents who brought with them the rhythms of ordinary life. Yet one of these residents, Emerson Ali, would become one of the last owners to actively use the home as a residence. Emerson Ali was a Korean War veteran and local cleaning service owner who lived in the Castle House with his wife Myra. Despite its tranquil appearance, the property seemed to hold an invisible weight, as if the lives and losses of its past residents were woven into the very fabric of the house. In 1998, Ali passed away within the home from a heart attack, one of the final owners to meet his end on the property. By the end of the 20th century, the Castle House stood as an ordinary home, with no signs of its future as a haunted destination. For those living in Brumley, it was a familiar sight, a place once known for its doctors and barber, but now quietly waiting for its next chapter. Yet, for those who understood the history, there was an unmistakable sense of sadness in its halls, as though the house itself remembered each life that had passed through. Although the Castle House may have seemed like just another home, the years of lives lost, memories stored, and quiet tragedies left an indelible mark on its walls. And while Brumley might have moved on, the stories of those who had lived and died within the Castle House would not be forgotten so easily. For decades, the Castle House had been a quiet presence in Brumley, a residence with a storied history yet outwardly ordinary. But in the 1980s, as new owners moved in and modern times touched its walls, the house began to change. Or perhaps it was merely beginning to reveal what had always been there. Through the late 20th century and into the 2000s, the Castle House continued to serve as a home for various families, each experiencing the property's unique atmosphere in their own way. But in 2013, the house took on a new role, one that would begin its journey toward the paranormal spotlight. In 2013, Nick Sacco and Marcy Hootner purchased the property, transforming it into a bed and breakfast with a historic charm. Sacco and Hootner had grand plans, imagining a quiet getaway for guests to experience the tranquil beauty of Brumley. But what they hadn't counted on was the Castle House's hidden legacy, a legacy that visitors and even Marcy herself would soon experience firsthand. Guests started to notice strange occurrences almost immediately. Stories of eerie sounds, cold spots, and unexplained feelings of being watched soon began to circulate. At first, Sacco remained skeptical, dismissing the reports of mere coincidence or the result of an overactive imagination. But Marcy's experience was different. One night, she saw what she described as Nick's doppelganger, an airy, exact double of her husband, that left her unsettled and convinced her that something unusual was indeed present. Unable to ignore the growing list of strange encounters, Sacco and Hootner decided to embrace the property's newfound reputation. The bed and breakfast evolved into a haunted destination where guests came not just for a peaceful stay, but for a brush with the paranormal. Stories of ghostly apparitions, unexplained footsteps, and whispers in the dark turned the Castle House from a historic property into one of Missouri's most intriguing haunted attractions. In 2016, ownership passed to Mike and Vicki Rowland, who continued the Castle House's haunted legacy. They expanded its offerings, hosting ghost tours, paranormal investigations, and events like the Festival of Witches and Warlocks, drawing both locals and visitors from afar. The house had fully embraced its haunted status, and those seeking an encounter with the unknown now flocked to Brumley to see the Castle House for themselves. For 2 years, the Rowlands welcomed guests, hoping to connect with the spirits rumored to linger in the Castle House. Stories continued to spread, some claimed to hear whispers, while others felt unseen presences brush past them in dark hallways. The house, it seemed, had transformed from a quiet historical site into a place where history and the supernatural converged. By 2018, the Castle House had earned its reputation. It was no longer just a piece of Brumley's history. It had become a character of its own, an entity shaped by generations of lives, losses, and memories that now seemed unwilling to rest. Though the Rowlands closed the bed and breakfast that year, the house's haunted status remained, and its story continued to draw curious visitors. Today, the Castle House stands as a testament to the past, a place where history itself feels almost tangible. The rooms, once filled with laughter and life, now carry whispers of the uncanny, drawing those who are brave enough to step inside. For the curious and the skeptics alike, the Haunted Castle House has become more than just a historical site. It's a living memory, one that keeps the echoes of Brumley's past very much alive. Though the Castle House had earned its haunted reputation by 2018, it was far from abandoned. That year, Dr. Steve and Judy Skinner, a couple with a passion for history and preservation, took ownership of the property. Originally from Paducah, Kentucky, Dr. Skinner, a dermatologist with over 25 years of practice in Alabama, and his wife Judy embarked on a journey to restore the Castle House while respecting its storied past. The Skinners approached the Castle House with both care and curiosity. Rather than simply living within its walls, they chose to honor its history by preserving the home and opening it to the public. Their work has breathed new life into the structure, restoring its historical elements while making subtle updates to keep it accessible for today's visitors. Under the Skinners' care, the Castle House has become both a historical monument and a portal to the past. They welcome guests who seek to experience its eerie reputation firsthand, hosting paranormal investigations and guided tours that bring people face to face with the mysteries embedded in its walls. Today, the Skinners open the doors of the Castle House for paranormal enthusiasts and history buffs alike. Visitors have reported strange sensations, sounds, and even sightings within its rooms, all while learning about the lives that shaped its story. Each tour and investigation offers a chance to experience both the history and the inexplicable atmosphere that lingers within. Beyond the ghost tours, Dr. Steve and Judy Skinner also hold special events throughout the year, inviting guests to immerse themselves in the Castle House's unique blend of history and legend. From local gatherings to special seasonal events, they strive to ensure that the Castle House remains a part of Brumley's community, preserving its past while sharing its stories with a new generation. For the Skinners, the Castle House is more than just a historical property. It's a living narrative, a piece of Brumley's past that they believe should be shared. Through their work, the house stands not only as a site of hauntings, but as a bridge between past and present, a place where history and mystery coexist. With every tour, every event, and every story shared, Dr. Steve and Judy Skinner keep the Castle House's legacy alive. They have transformed it into a place where history can be felt, remembered, and, for those who dare, even experienced firsthand. The haunted Castle House may hold its secrets, but thanks to the Skinners, it remains open to all who are drawn to its enduring mystery. The haunted Castle House has worn many faces through time. Doctor's office, family home, inn, and more recently, a portal into the past. Each family, each tragedy, and every patient treated here seems to add a layer to its story, as if the walls themselves are a mosaic of Brumley's own history. Its journey from an ordinary settlement home to an infamous destination reminds us that sometimes history doesn't just live in books, it lives in the very spaces we occupy. And in the case of the haunted Castle House, it feels as though history is just a whisper away.
It is real.